Assassin's Creed is a franchise that I grew up with. I've been playing it for close to 15 years now, and I feel it'd be wrong of me not to update this list every once in a while. I want to come at this slightly differently though. My opinions on this franchise remain largely the same as they always have, although when it comes to ranking the main releases, it sort of becomes arbitrary. I usually have a pile of good games that are interchangeable as my favourite, and a pile of bad games that are interchangeable as my least favourite, and depending on the day or the argument that I'm making, I pick one. So what I've decided to do writing this is to base it on how I'm currently feeling, what I'm currently playing, and how that changes the way I feel about this entire franchise. I went back and watched my 2019 list, and I still completely agree with pretty much everything I said, but that doesn't mean the list will remain exactly the same. But regardless of that, this is my personal list. If you feel differently, let me know. I'm open to hearing what your favourite or least favourite is and why. Try not to lose your minds if I don't agree. Video game rankings really are an exercise in maturity to a certain degree, so let's not turn the comments into a toxic shit-fleeing contest. Mature discussions and disagreements are welcome. So without further ado, let's begin. But let me just do some further ado. This video was sponsored by the online learning community Skillshare. Skillshare offers classes on a bunch of different things. A lot of people have been loving going in and being able to find new ways to spend their time, and that's great to see, as well as supporting the channel with that 2-month free membership. It's super affordable at under $10 a month after the free 2 months, and you're getting access to a ton of classes on things you might want to learn about. You never know, the potential career paths learning these skills could open for you. I've personally been using it to learn a little bit more of After Effects. I already knew the basics because of my college courses that I took, but I've wanted to delve a little bit deeper, and this has been a great opportunity to do so. Also, don't forget the deal is still available to you. The first 1,000 people to hit the link down in the description get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. It's worth checking out even if you don't think it's something you'd necessarily be interested in, because even just signing up for the free trial helps support me and also gets you access to a world of creativity you might not have thought about before. As always, if you do check it out with my link and decide to learn a new skill, tweet the results at me or hit me up on Discord. I'd love to know what you've all been learning how to do using Skillshare. At number 12 we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I can't believe I said that out loud. Now dubbed my least favourite Assassin's Creed game, and you know why. I'm not even going to dedicate a portion of this video to going into the details of why. I've said my piece on this absolute fucking travesty, and if you want to know why I feel the way that I do about this game in far more detail than it deserves, check out Assassin's Creed Odyssey Broke Me. I'll link it below. Number 11 is Assassin's Creed Syndicate. This game is one that I often forget exists, and it has slowly creeped to be lower and lower on this list over the years. For some reason, when I finished it back in 2015, I felt happy with it. I talked about this before, but I think it was because Unity was such a disaster. This game felt better in a lot of ways, but it's really only surface level. In its design philosophy and its narrative, it's just so poor, and I'd definitely argue worse than Unity, although for entirely different reasons as to why Unity is bad. Evie is a character I genuinely quite like a bit. It's just sad to see that she's sidelined so we can play as her obnoxious brother for 80% of the game. The movement is restricted more than it already was, and that's partly due to the awful choice of setting, as it very much doesn't lend itself to an Assassin's Creed title, as you can tell by the fact they had to invent the rope launcher to even make traversal viable. That should have been their first red flag to realise they had the wrong setting. The historical figures are treated like celebrities with their big pop-up title cards, and the entire narrative treats the audience like we're idiots. All of these things mixed with the over-the-top combat and unnecessary, constant and awful comedy makes this game feel like a parody of the brand that it's in. There are genuinely some strong moments within this game, like visiting the Kenway Manor with Henry Green and Evie, seeing all of Edward's possessions, and the fact that the password to enter his hidden room is playing the notes to Lowlands, one of the shanties from Black Flag, on the piano, which is so incredibly subtle, as we know that that song reminded Edward very much of his late wife Caroline, along with moments like Sean talking about the loss of Desmond and what he meant to him, the way their relationship grew and they became close friends, only to be ruined by the entrance of Galena doing an epic jump scare on Sean. It's a perfect example of how this game simply doesn't understand itself and sadly becomes entirely forgettable. Assassin's Creed Rogue is next on our list, a game that I despise more and more as time goes on. The only reason it's above Syndicate really is because it takes itself seriously. It might fail what it attempts to do, but at least it's not one big joke. Rogue is often heralded as the most underrated Assassin's Creed game, but honestly, all I see is it being overrated by almost everybody. From a gameplay perspective, it's Black Flag but bad. The context of what you're doing is so much lesser than Black Flag, and so sailing around the River Valley or the North Atlantic never comes close to sailing around the Caribbean as a pirate in command of your crew, which ultimately loses its points. On top of that, all the side activities are so contrived. It also suffers from the worst collectibles in the franchise, being that there are so fucking many. They littered the map with collectibles, and it's honestly hilarious sometimes just looking at the map and seeing what they think passes for content. As for the narrative of this game, oh boy do I have a lot to say. Rogue boasts being a game that follows the Templars. You get to see things from the other side, but in reality all they do is switch the names. The assassins from the start act very much like Templars. They're controlling, they're secretive, they're belittling, and they have no regard for the lives of the innocent. Switch over to the Templars and they literally act like assassins, saving people, respecting Shay who they take in, and trying to stop the assassins from misusing Isu sites. It's so horribly insulting as a narrative, and I cannot believe anyone genuinely looks at this and thinks it's anything but terrible. Oh my god, that was so good! So I think we gotta clap, we gotta give it a clap. Enjoyed that thoroughly, that was freaking great. Oh my god, that was a really good Monday as well. They did really awesome with the Monday. Hate them is honestly out of character, and the assassins literally have gangs in the city that are flying the assassin flags high in the sky as a beacon to their enemies. Literally the antithesis of what Altair's intentions were when reforming the Brotherhood centuries before. The game was a quick cash-in on the success of Black Flag without truly understanding what made Black Flag great. Rogue is a shallow and forgettable experience that is truly insulting to anyone who's followed the franchise for its entirety. Assassin's Creed Unity. What a polarizing game this is these days. I remember in 2014 it was a hot take to say Unity was even decent. It was hated by the entire games industry and AC fans alike, and for good reason. These days, for whatever reason, it's championed by a lot, and I do think I understand why. With the increasing move away from classic Assassin's Creed stories in the newer entries, Unity on paper does everything that we want them to do. Assassin-focused, strong urban environment with immersion at the forefront, lots of tools, a focus on stealth, being part of the Brotherhood, and a much shorter yet much more personal focused story. I get why Unity has become such a popular game as of recently, but sadly, despite the fact that on paper it looks to be like a killer Assassin's Creed game, the execution of it is still exactly the same as it was in 2014, a half-baked attempt at greatness. The story, for one, is a misstructured mess. It comes across like the first draft of what could have been a really thought-provoking narrative about the unity of Assassins and Templars, along with the reformation of ideas that are no longer serving in the best interests of the Creed. But sadly, the focus wasn't on that. It's cast away toward the midpoint, which should have been the ending. It's all happening in the wrong place. The confrontation with Belek would have made for quite a climax, and that resulting in the death of Elise would have hit harder than Germain, who is quite literally a nothing character who serves no purpose to any story they try to tell. That, along with the still buggy and messy gameplay and level structure, shows to me that this game needed more time. Perhaps another year in the oven could have resulted in the greatest Assassin's Creed to ever be made. All the ideas are there, it just needed to be put together more carefully. It needed to be polished, refined, and adjusted to be a well-rounded piece of media, but sadly, it was pushed out the door too early by money-hungry execs who can't see 2 feet in front of them to calculate the long-term implications of such a decision. I have a lot more sympathy for Unity's release now than I ever did. I understand why people adore it, and I can't really blame you after the recent entries, but for me it remains the disappointment that it was on release. A game beaming with potential that was never realised and remains a sad, sorry excuse for a game. Assassin's Creed 3 is a game that for a very, very long time I considered the worst game in this series, and hear me out. The reason for this is because I've been playing this series since 2007, and when they finally came to this game, it should have been so much more. It should have been this leap in quality, playing into all of the strengths of Assassin's Creed 1 through to Revelations, and capping off Desmond's story. In a lot of ways, this should have been the Assassin's Creed game to finish this saga of stories and games, but it just fell flat in many regards. The movement itself was dumbed down, nowhere near as bad as what came in the years after, but compared to how strong Revelations was, AC3 was far more automated and you had a lot less control. The combat, although looking flashy, is so much lesser in a lot of ways. How you have to complete animations before it'll do damage rather than your sword or axe making contact with the enemy. The setting was absolutely nothing compared to Renaissance Italy or the Holy Land during the Third Crusade. And after we had this incredible story in Revelations tying together Ezio, Altair and Desmond in such an incredible incredible and meaningful way, AC3 just felt so generic and lackluster. In a lot of ways, Revelations is an AC3 and everything but title. AC3 feels much more like an offshoot, disconnected in pretty much every way. The modern day, although it's championed by so many, sadly misses the mark for me. Modern day was never about doing epic fighting and action reskinned to look modern. It was about character development, exploring historical places through a modern lens, about building relationships and exploring mysteries, solving puzzles and using your brain. AC3 has very little of that. Any dialogue is mostly expositional and doesn't feel like real people talking. Connor is a failure of character writing in the sense that he does not develop at all, and the only scrap of development was cut from the game for whatever reason. He goes from being a naive child to a naive adult, and just continues murdering Templars because they're Templars, never questioning what they're saying to him, never evolving, never learning. It's frustrating to no end. That being said, however, I've come to appreciate a lot more of what this game has to offer. After many years of feeling disdain for what the game made me feel in 2012, there's almost an element of nostalgia that allows for me to revisit this game from a new lens. For example, the simple fact that the direction of the game is far more in line with Assassin's Creed than anything we've had in recent years is comfortable to me, it's familiar. Hate Them is a huge joy, every scene he's in, every piece of dialogue is peak Assassin's Creed, and it's written with such an understanding of the nuance behind the century-old war between these two factions. The Homestead offers probably the best settlement upgrade system we've seen in the franchise to date, with it including meaningful missions for all of your friends and their relationships with Connor. They're truly well written and actually present Connor in a much different light to the main story. The assassin recruits you can acquire and complete story arcs for are done in a very well designed way, allowing for the player to liberate districts of each city to eventually take down a major Templar target, all whilst developing a recruit alongside. And the Captain Kidd treasure missions are really cool additions. Despite not being quite as fun to actually play as the Assassin 2 missions from the Ezio trilogy, the concept of visiting a new area to play a set piece mission is really enjoyable, and they're very strong aspects of the game. AC3 does offer things to enjoy, and they're things that I can see a lot more clearly now. It is still lackluster in a lot of ways, and I do still feel disappointment by it, but as of 2021, almost 10 years after release, I'm happy to say that there's a lot more positives that I can focus on, and I do appreciate them, which is why it's moved up my list significantly. Assassin's Creed Origins is such a strange game to me these days. I adored this game when it came out. I think I even placed it above Black Flag in my 2019 ranking. It's not dropped significantly for me, although the cracks do show more now than they did prior. I feel that what Origins did was a somewhat middle ground between the RPG games and the classic games, but honestly maybe too much. The structuring is a bit mismanaged, level gating quests so that you have to do a bunch of mindless side quests before progressing, and that playing into the fatigue the game makes you feel as you trudge your way through it. Bayek as a character is incredible, and despite the writing not always being there, the performance never falters. Abubakar Salim is easily one of, if not my favourite performance of this entire franchise. The life and essence he gives Bayek is just unmatched. The range of emotions he can portray in a convincing and meaningful way just connects me to this character even when the writing may fall flat. Sadly, as an origin story, it doesn't really offer all too much. It's a very typical revenge story in which the assassins just sort of happen to be formed out of nowhere. There's not much philosophy and not much discussion or explanation, it just sort of happens, and there are hidden ones now, I guess. No actual formation of a creed, tenets, or a maxim. The DLC does try to do bits of this with the creation of the tenet to never harm an innocent, but it's sidelined to a DLC and it's only one tenet. It feels half-baked in a lot of ways. The world of Egypt is stunning, and exploring these ancient tombs and locations is still a joy, and I do feel that although my hatred for the question mark on the map system, exploration is still enjoyable even if discovery is dampened by the fact that everything of note is marked on the map. My biggest issue is that Origins marks the change in direction for Assassin's Creed. Post this game is where everything is based on numbers and stats. The worlds are simply massive with so much mindless fluff, and the identity of this brand becomes muddy and lost more than ever. Movement is simplified to be just climbing rather than meaningful parkour and advanced movements, and the stealth system becomes far lesser with the removal of social stealth and actual assassinations. Origins is a game that, while it does a lot very competently, it plays it too safe in a lot of areas for me. We've seen Assassin's Creed shine when it tries to tell complex narratives and delve deeper into its own mythos, but Origins stays comfortably on the surface and spelled the beginning of the end for this brand's identity. The newest entry into the Assassin's Creed series was a pleasant surprise to say the least. After Origins removed a lot of core elements and dumbed down the origin story and Odyssey did away with Assassin's Creed altogether, Valhalla tries its best to juggle the two sides of the fence, the hardcore old school fans who jumped on way back when, and the new brand of fans who are into this new wave of AC content. It's a tough job and I don't envy them at all. I'm currently on my second playthrough of Valhalla, preparing for my in-depth look at exactly how I feel about Valhalla and why, the ups and downs, and I want to get it as right as I can, so it's taking me a while to prepare. That being said, I'm pretty confident that I do like this game. There's a lot within the game that I hate, but there's a lot within the game that I love. It leads me to believe that I do just like the game. I don't love it, I don't hate it, I feel both for a lot of reasons, and overall I do like Valhalla. Whether you enjoy this game or not will depend on the kind of fan that you are, and I feel that at times it tries too hard to please everyone and ends up pleasing nobody. The focus of this game is on the Viking fantasy, which is never why I played these games to begin with. I played to be an assassin, I want the assassin fantasy. And one thing I love about this game is that you can very much play as an assassin if you want. The issue being, the game doesn't really want you to. Eivor doesn't really want you to, and so you're left with this disconnect. The game allows for the player to use social stealth, to wear a hood, to explore hidden bureaus, and to read codex pages, use a hidden blade, all of the things you'd expect. However, the context in which those things occur sort of render them pointless and throwaway. And that's a huge issue that I have. All the things that are fundamentally Assassin's Creed exist for the player, but not for Eivor, which makes them meaningless narratively. I still very much enjoy what they did with the modern day and where they take Eivor and her development, but I can't help but feel the game is torn between two very different extremes and ends up somewhere awkwardly in the middle. Despite that, and despite what I love, this game is one I can say I enjoy playing, for better or worse. I enjoy the game itself, and there's so much nuance to it. I'd rather I just hated the game. It would make making this video I'm working on so much fucking easier. But the fact is, I don't hate the game. There's so much in this game that I really like. And not just assassin things, there's lots of general game stuff I enjoy too. It's much more well balanced to put together than Origins and certainly Odyssey, that I do have fun with the game itself outside of an Assassin's Creed lens. And that's important for discussing the quality of a product as well. Like I said, I have a video planned that I'm still working on, and once it's done, I'll link it in the description. So if you're watching this video 6 months after it went up, then my Valhalla video is probably already out, so go give it a watch. Black Flag is a game that gets better and better the more years that go by, a story that begins from the point of view of an outsider and tells a personal journey that molds him into an assassin, someone searching for purpose that finds that purpose within the Creed. This entire franchise was created around the exploration of the Assassin's Creed. That's why it's called what it is. The first game explores the Assassin's Creed through the lens of somebody that needs to relearn what it means to be an assassin, and by doing so frees himself from an inner tyranny and that of the Brotherhoods in the form of his own mentor. Black Flag is really the first game since AC1 that deals with the Assassin's Creed as a central focus. What does it mean to be an assassin? What does it mean to be a Templar? How do these two ideologies that are forever at odds affect the life of a man searching for purpose, searching for reason, and searching for freedom? Edward Kenway is the perfect catalyst for this transformation. He's a man who means well, a man who is deeply caring, trying to forge the best life he can for himself and his loved ones. In doing so, pushing all of these people away. He loses so much and so many until he realizes that those connections, those relationships are the purpose. Humanity, love, and care are the reason for existence to Edward, and in seeking that instead of gold and plunder and glory, he can find purpose in the assassins. This is an assassin-adjacent story that slowly becomes a deeply connected Assassin's Creed story about what it means to be an assassin to someone who lives on the outside of this conflict. That being said, the gameplay is where this falters slightly, and I don't mean the basic moment-to-moment gameplay, I'm also meaning the structuring of missions. There are so many tailoring missions in this game that act as important dialogue or exposition, and you can't help but feel this game maybe would work better as a novel in a lot of ways. However, it is very strong in the gameplay and exploration department, with Black Flag possibly having the best open world they've ever built. The open space is large and vast, with plenty of negative space filled with plundering and the odd island to explore, as well as these more linear segments of jungles and beaches in which you progress through a nicely curated parkour and action set piece in order to discover collectibles or loot for your character's progression. You obviously then of course have the city areas like Havana, Kingston, and Nassau for you to explore as well, in a more classic Assassin's Creed style. Everything you do as Edward in this game plays into the journey they try to tell, and also this transformation from a selfish pirate type to an assassin. Sure, for the most part you're playing as a pirate who does assassin things, but the reason this works and doesn't feel tacked on is because it means something come the end, unlike Valhalla. You aren't learning assassin things to help push forward a pirate story, you're learning assassin things to eventually allow Edward to make that move from pirate to assassin along his own personal journey. It's meaningful gameplay-wise and story-wise. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag is subtle in its approach. It tells an engaging and well-paced story and allows for a killer pirate and assassin fantasy, placed in this great personal story that strings the player along every step of the way. I can completely understand why people say this is their favourite of the series. It does everything to earn that title, and I can't argue against it. Assassin's Creed 1 will forever hold a special place in my heart. I even considered this time placing it at number 1, but I stopped myself due to the fact that I know it's not the best. And I mean, the point of this list is a ranking based on my entirely subjective opinion, where I rank them based on my own history with this brand, etc. And I easily could make an argument for AC1 being at the very top, but when I started to look at it, it just didn't make sense to me. I love Assassin's Creed 1 now more than I ever did before, and that's saying a lot because I loved Assassin's Creed 1 from the first moment I played it back in 2007. Assassin's Creed 1 is a very niche title. It was never trying to appeal to the mainstream, it just was what it was and somehow became the cultural phenomenon that it is after that. And I think that's why you find a lot of criticisms with Assassin's Creed 1, because people jumped into this franchise with the newer games, or even with AC2, see AC1 as inferior and not really that good. And don't get me wrong, I understand why people feel that way, I just disagree wholeheartedly. To explain why, it comes from my own personal attachment to AC1, of course. Let's get that out of the way. This game is very special to me, but also I just feel it does things in tone, narrative and gameplay that were at the time very impressive and hold up very well today. Despite the lack of things to do in the open world areas, it uses them in a way that is very smart. AC1 is a linear game. It uses the open world as a backdrop. That's really what it does. It's not an open world game in the traditional sense. It's very much a linear game placed into a large open space for the player to move around in. Now, the structure of each assassination is the same to an extent. You arrive at a city, do an investigation, do the assassination, escape, and leave the city. But the game itself handles that structure in a way that I feel nobody truly appreciates. For a start, every new assassination is in a new place, a new district of a city you visited before, and so there's always new things to see. The target you face fit their respective regions perfectly, with Garnier, the doctor, operating out of the poor district of Acre, where the buildings are falling apart, people are dead in the streets, there's a high presence of guards, beggars and criminals, and you can see these things as you wander the streets. The environmental storytelling plays into the actual story of the target you're hunting and adds to the atmosphere. And likewise, the Merchant King of Damascus, Abul Nakud, is within the rich district of the city. There are wider streets, tons of vendors and bazaars with people selling wares, much taller and more lavish buildings with a better standard of living. The environmental storytelling tells another tale. Couple the way the game uses environment to convey narrative and atmosphere with the investigation mission's actual dialogue, and you paint a real picture of the target you're tracking before you ever meet them, building tension, building suspense. When you finally come into contact with your target, you feel cautious, you feel under threat. You could cut through the tension in the air with a knife, because although simple and basic on the surface, it's used in such a way that creates this atmosphere that has simply not been matched in Assassin's Creed to this day. The exploration of the Creed is beyond interesting. Altair's transformation through the confessions of the men that he kills, discovering the true Templar conspiracy and brotherhood, as well as the mysterious modern day layered on top, the complex and intricate advanced movement that becomes more intuitive the more you learn it, and the balance between fight and flight is just glorious. Assassin's Creed 1 does not get the credit it's due a lot of the time. To me, this game is an absolute masterpiece and will remain so to the end of my days. Now, Assassin's Creed 2 used to be my top spot for many years, and it's fallen down to number 3 for a few reasons. Don't get me wrong, everything number 5 upwards on this list could be number 1. I fucking adore all these, so AC2 being number 3 really means nothing, but I'll explain anyway. I think it's just due to the fact that the DLC and the main game are kind of inseparable at this point. A lot of people don't even realise that Sequence 12 and 13 are part of the main game, because it's almost impossible to get a version of Assassin's Creed 2 now that doesn't include them, and they certainly drag down the pacing a lot towards the end, and that's really all it is. The game itself, though, is of course a step up from AC1, at least in terms of its base gameplay loops. It uses the open world in an even more meaningful way, perhaps dropping some of the environmental storytelling, but regardless making each district of the city, especially Venice, feel unique and interesting. The building up of Monteriggioni is absolutely brilliant, and that whole aspect of the game is completely natural to the story being told. The missions actually tell a story, and although in Assassin's Creed 1 the story being told was incredibly engaging, it was almost subtly underlying rather than front and center, which, although I love, it's hard to argue that AC2 didn't do it better. But most of the reasons why this game sits above AC1 is because it acts not only as a sequel in terms of modern day, but ancestry as well. Ezio's progression is deeply aided by Altair. Not only that, but we learn more about Altair's later life through this progression. Altair invented the poison blade, a hidden gun, 2 hidden blades, new assassination techniques, and not just that, but he wrote about his life through the codex pages. This game is not just a sequel to Desmond and the story, but a direct character sequel too. We even get to play as Altair for a small portion of the game, showing he's not forgotten and entirely relevant to the sequel. His story did not end and they didn't move on. Altair is a huge part of Ezio's growth, and I love that. Not to mention, this game introduces us to my favorite fictional character of all time, Ezio Auditore, a man that has so many layers to him, so much development progression that I made a whole damn video specifically about that, which again, I'll link below. Assassin's Creed 2 is a timeless game that understands what makes great gameplay, it understands what makes great storytelling and characters, and it definitely understands what it means to be Assassin's Creed. I could have made this number 1. I really wanted to, but there were a few things stopping me. Revelations is the greatest script in this franchise, the greatest Assassin's Creed story ever told, and it's genuinely not even close for me. The only one thing stopping me from putting this at number 1 is purely the pacing and structure at times. Sometimes it feels the missions don't flow naturally one to another, and the side content mainly is quite lacking when compared to Brotherhood. That, as well as the modern day being just a few pieces of audio that Desmond hears in a coma, doesn't exactly live up to what Brotherhood did, but then again, that's really a consequence of circumstance more than it is poor direction on their part. But that being said, this game simply shouldn't exist given how good it is. The fact that it was turned from a DS game to a console game in such a short space of time and is still this good is fucking astounding. This game, similarly to all of the games that our boy Darby works on, is very narrative heavy and doesn't often compromise that for gameplay, which I truly admire. This game tells the final story of Ezio whilst also revisiting Altair again and using both narratives to play into one another and then into Desmond in such an organic and satisfying way. This game blows me away every single time. The game doesn't ever stop itself once from going all in. It uses lore, it uses characters to their full extent. The philosophy of the Creed has maybe never been more present than it is in this game. Ezio's development hits its peak and you see that he is broken as he always has been. His resolve is weaker and you see the man under the hood once again. You see Ezio the man rather than Ezio the assassin. Darby has a great way of showing us the humanity of characters and maybe none more than he does with Ezio. Ezio's understanding of the Creed and its ironies is what leads him to leave it all behind. That, coupled with learning directly from the memories of Altair, concludes his story in such a powerful and emotional way. Using 3 characters that are centuries apart, the narrative threads thus far since 2007 are used to connect them across the ages. Never do Altair, Ezio, and Desmond meet, but they feel connected by the end. All 3 seemingly distant characters are connected by a single brotherhood, and it's so beautifully concluded. Revelations is crafted from the heart for people who followed these games since the franchise's inception. From the way it handles Ezio's journey, his relationship with Sophia, his internal struggles in his letters to Claudia, being able to revisit Altair and seeing how Desmond copes post-Brotherhood, along with 16's consciousness continuing to make us think. Revelations is a game that respects its past and uses it in such a meaningful narrative way. It doesn't try to be a historical theme park ride, it doesn't try to be an epic action RPG, it just tries to be Assassin's Creed. It owns it and has earned the praise that it deserves. My number 1 for now doesn't change. It might never change. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is a masterpiece. Not only does it tell a meaningful sequel to Ezio Auditore building on what came before, it manages to push the franchise forward in a big way. They nailed side content and world design in this game. The world has never felt more important to the story being told. Every single thing you do in this game has a purpose, from smaller courtesan assignments to Leonardo's war machines. They all aid in the singular focus, which is to take down the Borgia and build up the Brotherhood. Ezio's journey across this game is one that is entirely told in a very subtle manner. His relationships with his allies and friends is tested, his resolve also. His ability to lead shines through, and we see Ezio become the mentor of a new Brotherhood of Assassins that we slowly build up across the game. The game is focused equally on storytelling, open world exploration, side content, and the pure assassin fantasy. It continues all of the things that I loved about Assassin's Creed 2 whilst introducing new elements into its world, and on top of that revisiting things presented in Assassin's Creed 1 that were partially missed in Assassin's Creed 2. The concept of the city feeling oppressive, the visual and environmental storytelling used in the different districts of Rome are all very Assassin's Creed 1 in design and add to making Brotherhood feel more whole and focused. They manage to tell various stories across their side content in a way that they add to the main focus of the game. The story of the followers of Romulus across the Romulus tombs seem disconnected connected but are actually part of a Borgia conspiracy, using coded messages in order to give orders and control the people. Ezio's goal here is to get to the bottom of it, and that then makes sense as to why he's doing these things, because it's critical to building up their forces in Rome and helping the people break free of Borgia influence. The modern day is easily the best the franchise has ever been, weaving Ezio and Desmond's journey together whilst fleshing out and building up the state of the modern day through the greater narrative regarding Abstergo, but also the more tight-knit group we've come to know. Plenty of optional dialogue allows for the player to feel closer to these characters, and the way they structure modern day missions shows a clear tonal shift from the action hero that is Ezio to the ragtag group of regular people we see in the modern day. Everything about this game screams Assassin's Creed, from the use of social stealth to the emphasis on parkour routes and advanced movement, especially in tomb-like missions which are used frequently in Brotherhood, assassinations being well designed and satisfying, and the progression of the player, the city, and the Brotherhood you build feeling incredibly natural. Brotherhood is truly the staple for what makes the perfect Assassin's Creed game, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Any AC game moving forward that wants to try to be an Assassin's Creed game should look to Brotherhood for inspiration. Focus, atmosphere, character, and world content are the best we've ever had, and this game will remain for some time my personal favourite Assassin's Creed game. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed my list. I tried my hardest not to go over the same things that I've talked about before, so some of the segments might be a bit more concise than maybe my 2019 list, but I didn't want to just repeat myself over and over again. Like I said, let me know your lists in the comments and why. Don't forget to check out some of my other videos that I've mentioned, linked in the description, as they go hand in hand with some of the things I've talked about here. I'm sure I'll continue updating this list to the end of time, but for now, this is where I stand as of 2021. Like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you soon for something new. Catch you later, folks. Bye-bye.